Right, welcome to this Leeds Salon meeting, Fracking in the Future of Energy. My name's Paul Thomas, I'm one of the organisers of Leeds Salon. This meeting tonight is actually one of about 6 debates on and around fracking that has taken place in Leeds just in October and November, some of which that we've been to. However, most of those meetings, although not all, have tended to be from just the environmental point of view. At the Salon, we like to try and represent a wider set of views than that, and we hope to attract a broad and diverse range of views to put our speakers under some pressure as well. I don't know what the speakers are going to say tonight. The remit was they could speak about fracking, the dash for gas, and or the future of energy. Now, science is obviously important to this debate, but this is a political debate, and in many ways, perhaps the most important word in the title is not so much fracking or energy, but the word future, because debates around energy and debates around the environment more generally are debates around the kind of world we want to live in and the kind of future we want to see. Now, to discuss tonight's issues, we have invited James Woudhuysen, who is Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at De Montfort University, Leicester. For more than 20 years, James has consulted for major corporations and for government. He's a journalist and is co-author of Why is Construction So Backward? And Energise, A Future for Energy Innovation, which he's kindly brought along, and at the cost of £5, which is very, very cheap, compared to Amazon. And there's copies at the front to buy. And speaking second, we have Andrew Cooper, who's been a Green Party councillor on Kirklees Council since May 1999 and is the party's lead candidate for the Yorkshire and Humber region for the 2014 European elections. He's worked in the energy efficiency microgeneration sector for the last 20 years and has written a letter to Yorkshire and Humber MEPs regarding fracking. Both of our speakers will have around 12 minutes to deliver their opening remarks. I'll allow them a brief reply to each other's remarks before we open it up to the audience. And the way we work at the Salon is we will take several questions or comments at a time. So it doesn't just have to be a Q&A between the audience and the panel. You can take up what each other say in the audience as well. So it is over to James to start us off.
Thank you, Paul. Well, it's a great privilege to be here up north. This is the Marcellus Shale on the surface in the United States, and I think most of you will know some of the basics in terms of drilling, and horizontal drilling in particular. You go down, then you go right around the block, and I'm not going to dwell on that too much. Let me say that I do agree with Andrew and the Green Party, and I guess with most people in this room, that climate change, man-made climate change, is a problem. So in terms of what we have in common, I think we got question marks instead of bullet points owing to Bill Gates, but let's not worry about that. We do have a problem. We've also got stars, which is jolly nice. So I think we have that in common. And the second thing I think we have in common is that energy prices are too high. And a thing that we also may not have the details in common, I think we agree on, is that safety is paramount. It's very important. If you look at the numbers, putting up a solar panel or a roof in America is the 6th most dangerous job in the States. So although I favour green energy, along with all forms of energy, I think it's not too polemical to observe that every source of energy, which is not really so much what I want to talk about tonight, has its own safety issues. If you look at wind turbines, there have been 1,500 accidents around them in the last 4 or 5 years. Let me say also that there's a wider cost to green energy some of the time, not so much in terms of human safety, although it is involved in it. If you look at Scientific American and all its analysis of all the metals, in particular silver and others that go into solar panels and stuff like that, there are environmental costs to that. But I think we agree that in energy supply, safety is vital. And I hope we agree that you don't have to be an alarmist or believe everything that the National Grid says to say that, particularly when you look around the world, blackouts are a problem. They're a growing problem in the advanced world as well as the underdeveloped world, and they are probably coming to an estate or an office near you in the winter of 2015 to 16, if the National Grid is to be believed. So I think those warnings, without going over the top, should be taken seriously. The final thing that I hope we agree on is that the world needs more energy. When China is turning buildings into cinemas, when it's building, whether you like it or not, 7 new terminals at Pudong Airport in Shanghai, the world needs more energy. It's not just a question of climate change, but everybody, especially Africa, needs a whole lot more energy if it is to develop and raise living standards. Now let me also say what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, although I'm pro-fracking, that it's going to lead to lower prices, because although I have a degree in physics and will not regale you with the first 30 elements of the periodic table, unless I'm under pressure from Andrew, I want to say that I can't understand my Eon bills any more than you can, and I think there's absolutely no guarantee that fracking will lower them in any way. In principle it should, because as I'll show, it's a higher productivity method of gas extraction than other methods. But by the time the big six have been through it all, and you've gone through European energy markets and all of that, no guarantee that it's going to go anywhere. In fact, when you look at the energy firms, they're awash with cash. Petrobras has more than $130 billion worth of debt, as well as a cash hoard of $32 billion. So they're more in the cash business in some ways than they are in the extraction, and certainly in the innovation business. So I think there's no guarantee that fracking will lead to lower energy prices. I'm not saying it will do that. Another argument that I'm not going to make is that it improves energy security. I think with the recent events in Iran and all of that, you could say, well, you know, fracking will give us our own indigenous energy supply. It's a world market, folks. Like it or not, it's a globalized world economy, so I can't get along with the argument that fracking will make us independent of Vladimir Putin and all the rest of it. It's not going to guarantee UK energy security. And anyway, as an internationalist, my concern is not just with the UK, but with the whole world's energy supply. Now, a third argument that I'm not making is that the UK geological conditions are the same as those in the US. They're not. You have to drill deeper, probably tougher, and that's just to speak of the geology, leave aside the patterns of settlement. Although before we rush with so many other parties, thankfully not the Green Party, because I checked your line on population before I came out tonight, most people believe Britain to be an overcrowded island. Clearly the urban density is here, and the general population density in this country is bigger than it is in Dakota or Utah. But nevertheless, we are not overcrowded. Only 2% of the land is devoted to residential housing. Only 9% is urbanized or built upon at all. There's plenty of room all over Britain to do all kinds of things, but it doesn't mean that it's exactly as easy or simple as it is in the States. And the final point I want to make, our friend Eric, is that I think we agree that fracking should be regulated, but that doesn't mean that it's all going to be perfect, because when you've got people like Eric in charge, who's just opposed a very large solar panel installation in the east, and not just on top of one house, which I'm sure Andrew would agree doesn't really help us too much, but a really large solar panel installation, it being a diffuse source of energy, you might as well do it big if you do it at all. He's just gone against that, and you know, I don't really think that regulation is something to write home about. Let me just introduce a little hare to go coursing later. Many people do believe that regulation is terrific in every regard, and they will argue that we need it to be regulating or banning fossil fuels, nuclear, the Severn Barrage, High Speed 2, speeding faster than 20 miles an hour in Brighton, which is run by a Green Party council, no new roads, no new housing on the Green Belt, no fast food, no fizzy drinks, no foie gras, according to the Green Party, no hate speech, no tabloids, no page 3, no lads mags, and the important cause of the moment that even Ed Millibore has taken up, no Wonga payday lenders. If you believe all of these things, that the state should fix all of this by banning everything, I would suggest that's rather restrictive, and it also shows a lot of illusions in the state's ability to bring progress. So I'm not saying that fracking is the answer to all our problems, and I urge you to listen to what I'm saying, not perhaps, as some people do, especially down in Lewes, Sussex, what they think I'm saying. Actually, what I am saying. What I am saying is a little different from the normal argument for fracking. The normal argument about energy is all about rival sources, and one wears one's source affiliations a bit like a badge of identity. You know, they'll be having ribbons next, say a pink one for wind, you know, a blue one for solar, and so on. And that doesn't get us very far, I don't think, because the title of my talk is about, and what I profess in, is in energy innovation, and I think that's the thing that is so often lacking from debates, and I hope we can change that tonight. I favour the Severn barrage. It's been mooted for 100 years, it still hasn't happened. Ornithologists of some persuasions believe it would be better for birds if they built one rather than worse. I also favour and have consulted for a geothermal energy company which straddles Devon and Cornwall. I'm in favour of that source as well. And I'm in favour of solar panels, providing it's done at scale. I don't have a problem with that. This is one of the largest installations, 10 megawatts, on the General Motors building in Spain. What I'm interested with every source, though, is technological progress. Why? Not because I'm a man, a techie, an oily rag, an engineer, or even a physics graduate, but rather because I think that technological progress is in principle less intensive with labour, less work, and means that we can not talk about energy so much because we don't have to bother about it because it's all running on rails. That's why I'm in favour of it. And that's why I look forward to new materials in solar panels that will make them more efficient and a proper rival for other energy sources. I hope we'll have only civilian, drones powered by insects' wings that will check out whether those solar panels need scrubbing, cleaning, maintaining, replacing, and all of these things. And I put it to you, if you look at the history of fracking, when it was first advanced in 1947, it was to do with napalm they were using. That was pretty backward technologically, not much horizontal drilling there. It's taken a very long time for capitalism to even begin, 60 years in fact, to even begin to take fracking seriously, as the technological impetus for advance in the West has tended to dwindle over the last 5 decades. If you don't believe me, go to the dreaded International Energy Agency. Here's the Director General. She looks happy enough. She's not that happy because, in fact, research and development in energy is down by 66% since the 80s. Sorry about the cut-offs here. Blame Bill Gates. If you look at the numbers, 81, 91, 2001, 2011, you can see nuclear R&D has nearly vanished. Fossil fuels was never much and is still very weak. Renewable energy sources are up, and even more interesting is the thing that's most up is energy efficiency. Insulation, 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 as Gordon Brown paraphrased Tony Blair. You might revel in that, but if you look at the Greens in the United States, you'll find that when they analysed the jobs that were created by insulation and so on, they were temporary, few, poorly paid, and not very high tech. They're not durable jobs. They are broadly labour intensive, and that's exactly why I want innovation to make sure that we don't go down the Gandhi route. Everywhere we look at in energy today, there isn't really much innovation, even from General Electric, which has got out of the nuclear business. They're so sad about it. The boss, Jeffrey Immelt, was a happier bunny in earlier days, but now he's not so happy, doesn't want to do nuclear, and we really face the prospect of power cuts because of this. And if you look at the research intensities of the major energy companies, you will see that they are devoting just 0.2% of their sales to research and development. That's one of the reasons why we got Deepwater Horizon with BP. So I just want to say that what I'm saying is energy debates, and I hope tonight, should not be about, although they are about at the moment, a great pity, one source versus another. They should be about the issues that I've raised. With higher productivity, in principle, there should be lower prices and greater safety as well. In order to make fracking environmentally friendly, we would have to invest in carbon capture and storage, not just in coal plants, but in gas plants as well. And that's what they're beginning to do in Scotland. So it needs to be part of a panoply of energy measures, not just by itself, to succeed. I'm just winding up. I've got plenty more, but that's after Andrew. We need CCS. And what my fundamental argument for fracking is, if you look at the numbers in the United States and elsewhere, because of your ability to access through horizontal drilling many more cubic meters of gas, it's approximately 3 times as efficient as conventional methods of extraction. That means the labor productivity is 3 times as great, and that's my main reason for favouring it. It won't be in every geological condition. It may only be twice as great as in Britain, not 3 times as great as it is in America. But it is broadly more efficient because of this horizontal drilling, which is the later development in the history of fracking. So I think that's all I got to say. I just want to just conclude by saying fracking is worth experimenting with in Britain, not least to check every aspect of safety. Now, many people, especially on the green side of the fence, I trust not Andrew, are against experimentation and believe that it's far too dangerous. If you look at the sensibility to risk, it's grown enormously, and I think quite out of proportion to the real risks. When we developed FAR, we made a risky move, but at the same time, with all the downsides of FAR, we also developed the FAR engine, the FAR hose, the FAR blanket, the FAR extinguisher, and many other methods of dealing with the new problems that technologies always bring. I'm not denying there are risks with fracking. I think we should experiment to find out more about them. And we get back to Eric Pickles. Just to conclude, regulation is not a guarantee that those risks will be solved, because the regulators cannot be relied upon. What can be relied upon is the people in this room. If we are energized and knowledgeable enough about energy, and if we recognize that it's not just a competition between sources, but it is a question of human advance, human ingenuity, and these things, then we have some guarantee, much better than the Department for Energy and Climate Change, or Ofgem, that the kinds of experiments that we do will genuinely be safe, genuinely be productive, and stand a chance of lowering prices. I've got much more to say about the safety problems and the risks, and we can look at them. I hope we will, but I hope you'll hear the new argument that I tried to make tonight. Thank you.
I think we're starting from a principle whereby we're agreeing with each other with things. So one thing I will agree with is it is not a matter of one source of energy during against another that we're talking about here. I think we've got to start from the basic principle that climate change is real, and climate change is one of the greatest threats to humanity and to the world in general that we're facing. And that's got to be the thing which is going to be driving a lot of energy policy going forward, because it's got to. Because if we don't deal with that, then people now and even further in the future are going to suffer the consequences if we don't. So that's got to be a principle by which is going to underlie a lot of our energy policy, and that's how we've got to look at it. Where I'm going to start from, I guess, is from the point of view that there's got to be a hierarchy in terms of energy when we're looking at energy. And that hierarchy has got to start from the point that we've got to save as much energy as we can. We've got to start with energy conservation as a basic principle. So we're not simply accommodating demand. As James was saying, we need more power. We're going to need more power. We've got to conserve power. We've got to find ways of actually using energy more efficiently and reducing the demand that we have. So we've got to look at it in that way. We've got to take that as a starting point. And so where we are using energy, we've actually got to use as many renewable sources as we can earlier on. As we're using energy more efficiently, we're conserving it, we've got to use renewables to a greater and greater degree. So where I'm going to start from in terms of a date is 2007, because that was when Tony Blair signed up to the EU's renewable energy target for 2020. And in 2020, the EU is aiming to have 20% of its total energy from renewable sources. That's total energy in terms of electricity, in terms of heating, and in terms of transport fuels. Now the UK, because there were only 2 countries which had a worse record in terms of renewable energy than the UK, that was Malta and Luxembourg. So only very small countries can we feel superior to. Because there are only 2 countries, we were given a lower target. So we were given a 15% target of our total energy was to come from renewable sources, whereas places like Sweden and Germany were going for 30 and 40% of their energy, much higher targets. So when we're looking at energy, we've got to look at ourselves, and we've got to look at ourselves in comparison with other countries and seeing what they are capable of doing, and not look at it in isolation and say, why is this too difficult for the UK? Why are we finding this difficult? So the point I'm making here is, if when we're looking at fracking, and if we're looking at a technology which is a new carbon-intensive technology, a new door that we're opening, a new dangerous door that we're opening, then we've got to look at what we're doing to deal with other things. And what I would say is that if you look at the UK government's current policy and the policies that preceded it on energy conservation, they're actually extremely poor. If you look at the government's own Green Deal, it's the flagship policy of the coalition government, which is supposed to conserve energy, which is focused on insulation. This is a loan scheme which is going out at 8%, and it's incredibly unpopular. It's been going since February, and it's only just achieved about 1,000 people who've signed up to it. If you look at Leeds, if you look at Kirklees, if you look at Sheffield, you've got hundreds of thousands of people who've signed up to schemes run by councils, not national governments. And you look at this scheme that's there. You used to have an energy efficiency programme for people in fuel poverty, cancelled, the Warmfront scheme, now a scheme run by utilities. And now we have the government talking about, and the Prime Minister talking about green crap. Now, green crap is the money that's available from fuel bills, to actually, a lot of that, to help people in fuel poverty, and also to fund renewable energy developments. So if you're getting that line from central government, if you're getting that line from the Prime Minister, allegedly, according to his own press people, then you're thinking, are we doing enough on energy conservation? So on the domestic energy front, we're not doing enough. And one of the things which really characterises UK policy and makes it really difficult in energy conservation and renewable energy terms is we keep changing our policies every 5 minutes. A Daily Mail article will change policy. There will be. I've seen policies change in a few months in terms of the amount of money that's available for feed-in tariffs for solar panels and for wind turbines. And when you come across that, I was invited to go on a DTI trade delegation to Germany to represent local governments, to talk about how local government could help try and get Germany to invest in the renewable sector in the UK. And what they were saying was, well, why would we do that? You change your policies every 5 minutes. Why would we invest in this whole area of work? Why would we do that when we've got very stable policies in Germany and in the rest of Europe? It's in the UK where you're just crazy. You behave incredibly incoherently when you're actually looking at your energy policy. So when we're starting from that point of view and you're not doing the minimums, why should you start opening a new silver bullet? Because it is the government who's calling it a silver bullet, which is shale gas. We're not expected to hit our very lower than average target, the 15% target in 2020. We're now effectively in special measures because we've not done enough to move that on. So moving on to fracking itself, I take what James is saying about price, but what is coming out of central government, what is coming out of the mouths of George Osborne and the like, is that fracking is going to be something which is actually going to help fuel poverty. It's one of the reasons that is being given. People can't, they'll say, look at these poor pensioners, look at these people in fuel poverty. Fracking will come along and save the day. But it's the people who argue against that point. Yes, okay, there'll be environmentalists who do that, but it's people like Deutsche Bank, it's people like Quadrilla, the people who actually do this. They're the ones who are saying, actually, it's not actually going to reduce prices. Even they're sort of fairly unsympathetic to that sort of point of view. And when we look at things like the water pollution that's associated with it, the amount of water that's actually required to do this, yes, we have an awful lot of floods, but we also have a lot of periods of drought, and there's an awful lot of water is actually required in this. And once the water is used during the fracking process, that becomes contaminated with with an awful lot of nasties in terms of things like lead, arsenic, chromium, and radioactive materials. And the big question is, what happens with all that water afterwards? Where does it go? And I've never had a real satisfactory answer to that. Of course, the thing about shale gas is it's effectively methane. And methane itself is a greenhouse gas. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And if that leaks, as it does during the operation, that will completely negate the benefits that come from greenhouse gas that are supposed to come from substituting from coal. So if you move from coal, which is a very carbon-intensive fuel, to methane, you're supposed to make some savings. But because there's so much leakage associated with fracking, those gains simply aren't made. So some real concerns there. And of course, regulation, what they're saying is that this is going to be the safest, this is going to be the most effective regulatory regime in the UK of anywhere in the world. It's going to be absolutely marvellous. And that's the message coming from government. So you've got to ask yourself the question, when in the EU there is a vote on having a strong regulatory regime for fracking, why is it the Conservative MEPs who are voting against it? Why is that? I wonder. And so if you look at Balkan, where there's recently the drilling that went on down there, how many visits do you believe came from the Health and Safety Executive or the Environment Agency to have a look at the operations that were going on in Balkan when you're down there? Any guesses? Well, it's a nice round figure, it's zero. So that's the regulatory regime at the moment, and I don't think that the regulatory regime that we're going to get from this is going to be much better. What I'm very much concerned about is when you actually look at the government and you look at the background of a lot of the people who are involved there, you look at the government, and they come from a lot of gas and oil backgrounds. It's what they know. And you don't have to be conspiratorial about this, you don't have to think there's some sort of conspiracy there, but because it's what they know, because it's what they understand, that is probably where a lot of their emphasis will certainly go on. And so I have concerns about that. So, yes, I very much believe in experimentation. I think that's an important thing, and if you look at the wind, solar, you look at renewable technology, a lot of that was actually built upon experimentation. They're the pioneers at the Centre of Alternative Technology, the people down at Machynlleth there who actually built what is now a huge international billion-dollar industry in many ways that's come from them. So yes, I do believe in that, but that doesn't mean that I will open the door to a carbon-intensive technology when we're facing global catastrophe. That's just simply irresponsible, and we shouldn't be doing it. We should be doing the basics first. Insulation, 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 I agree 100%, but we're not doing it, and we simply have to. So I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Thank you very much,
Two main points, if I may, and as I tried to anticipate, being in the forecasting business, Andrew's arguments, and I really value the tone that you've set. It's very important that on every issue, not just energy, that we are tolerant. That doesn't mean we don't judge each other, but it does mean that we are tolerant. And in that spirit, Andrew, I'm bound to say, just because you have a background in energy efficiency and renewables, I won't hold it against you. I think you're foolish to make the point that the government has backgrounds in gas and oil. Maybe they do. Actually, it'd be a refreshing change for anybody in government to have any industrial experience whatsoever, since most of them are failed student politicians. But the background question, doesn't really interest me very much, right? The arguments, which are what's important. Now, the two things I want to deal with, if I may, is just a question of risk and safety, and then this question of conservation, right? In 1986, in the year of Chernobyl, Ulrich Beck, the German sociologist who helped close down nuclear energy in Germany, wrote this very important book. And he anticipated Donald Rumsfeld. Do you remember him? There was what you know, what you don't know, and what you don't know, you don't know. What the hell is that? Or you can spend your whole night sort of having nightmares about what is it I don't know, I don't know. All you know is you don't know. But that sort of foreboding about the future, it seems to me, is very culturally widespread. And if you take one of the main risks, a very serious risk in some ways, that is associated with fracking, namely that it will contaminate aquifers in an irreversible manner, to my knowledge this has not happened. It could happen, and maybe other things worse than that could happen. But maybe all of those fears say more about us than the real dangers with fracking. Since the end of the Cold War, the fear of risk, the fear of the future, has really grown. And it's very interesting, if you look at The Guardian back in 1999, we're all supposed to be dead from mad cow disease by now. And if you look at all the things that we're supposed to be dying of, ADHD is what you've got listening to me. Disco TB is the tuberculosis you pick up at the disco. Phthalates, they're in an iPad, they're plastic. And the EU, in its beneficence, has determined that if you lick a rubber duck for 200 years in a bath, you will become a laboratory rat. So, and it's amazing. And the most interesting thing about this risk stuff is we've never been healthier, actually. We've never been taller, we're going Dutch, and we've never lived longer, in fact. But nevertheless, if you add all the risks together, you should panic. So let's look at quickly at the arguments against fracking. Heavy lorries, bit of a problem, but come back on me on this, Andrew. I think hopefully reasonably temporary when it's done. The footprint against other things. Yeah, a bit of a problem, but there is quite a bit of space in Britain. I'm not saying it should be done in Croydon or central Leeds or anything like that, nor in Snowdonia. I like aesthetics and animals and landscapes just as much as the next man. But we shouldn't exaggerate the risks there. What about fraccidents, as they're called? Well, I went to Earth Justice because the Earth needs a lawyer. Very interesting concept in America. You see all the skulls and crossbones. You actually look at them. About 4 or 5 people have died in explosions around fracking. It's 4 or 5 too many in the States. If you think of 45 murders a day in the States and 85 road deaths a day in the States, it's relatively modest, and certainly modest compared with other forms of energy supply. You look at the earthquakes. Old Quadrilla off Lancashire had a force 2 magnitude earthquake. It's a bit worrying, but there's 25 natural ones every year. So I can't get really frenetic about that. Now, if somebody advances a really good argument about safety, then even with Eric Pickles behind it, I would ban it. But I haven't heard one yet. I'm sympathetic. You can't see the small print. Here are all the nasty things that are in the water. There are large volumes of water engaged, but if you look at the percentages, a lot of them acid, 0.1%, it's 1 part per 1,000. Antibacterial agents, 0.001%. I'm getting lost. So I think when you look at contamination above the surface, or you look at the natural toxins that can be unleashed by fracking, it's pretty modest. Now, we could have an argument, maybe we should have an argument about secrecy and transparency. I don't trust Quadrilla any more than I do Eon or any of those bastards. I don't, right? I don't. But that wasn't my argument. I'm pleased that you said it was the coalition making this argument about the silver bullet, because it's not me that's making the argument. So what one has to do is get the right arguments for fracking, not the wrong ones. Now, let me make the most controversial one. I'll come back on the conservation thing. That's for another moment, right? Which is, if fracking was as dangerous as Andrew says it is, then why, when you do a search for class actions and fracking, class actions in double inverted commas, and fracking, do you find that the main leading entries, this is one, 3 dozen lawsuits filed in the States. This is in 2011, saying hydraulic fracturing litigation, get your mouth around that. Hydraulic fracturing litigation is on the rise. 2011, that's one of the most recent entries. And I think this is an American Facebook thing, or maybe it's an English one. Fracking class action lawsuits, not much on the site, 61 likes. Now you look at BP, and I've been on an oil rig in the North Sea. I've written a review of a book critical of BP, a favourable review of Deepwater Horizon. There, they've got $50 million behind the class action campaign. There are, they've got 9,500 of 59,000 business economic loss claims have been successful. They've had 60,000 claims. That's what a class action is, right? Against BP. Where is it against fracking? I know some celebrities are against it, and a few people in Occupy, but I don't see the wellspring of opposition that happened in Louisiana and everything else like that. Now, just to finally deal on the safety and risk thing with Andrew's point about water usage, if you take the driest place in China, which is the Tarim Desert, if you go to my website, if you can spell my name, you'll find a big article about China fracking, because I especially looked at it, because it's a big deal. You know, it's got the largest shale reserves in the world, probably, and they're not doing much about it. They prefer to import from gas from Turkmenistan and so on. But if you run the numbers, they'll never get it, because the Chinese Communist Party is in charge. 100 billion cubic meters of shale gas a year. That would require 34,000 rigs. Even in China, they're not going to do that in a hurry. Which in turn would demand, rather interestingly, 1 billion cubic meters of fresh water. But today, China uses 600 billion cubic meters of water. What with recycling, even local or output pinch points, they should be able to find that 1 billion cubic meters, because it's a relatively small proportion of all the water in China. In the desert, it would be a bit more of a problem, but not an insuperable problem. So water shortages don't do it for me. We could look at the irreversible subsurface contamination, and there you might have an argument. Let's explore that a little bit. Right? Is it really irreversible? Are we really saying that with the ability to put people on the moon, where the Indians can send a satellite to Mars and all of this, we could not reverse or stop or fix or desalinate around an aquifer that was contaminated? And where is that contaminated aquifer is what I want to know. And finally, the most telling argument that you make is on methane emissions. Now, you make the point, quite rightly, that methane is a more dangerous greenhouse gas than carbon. I think it's 17 times as dangerous, but as you also will, I'm sure, concede, it doesn't last as long. It disappears much faster than carbon from the atmosphere. Methane doesn't have that kind of longevity. And if you look at the proceedings of the National Academy of Science in the States, this is what they said about the methane emissions that attend fracking in the United States, and also natural gas extraction. But no, actually just fracking. The emissions, as you will see from the numbers, have gone down, because the compressor pumps that are being used around fracking installations are becoming technologically more advanced. The detection is better. There is flaring, which isn't ideal, but at least gets rid of the methane. And there's more capture of methane. So if it went down, Bill Gates permitting, you would see, of course it's only the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that generally speaking, technological ingenuity is lowering the amount of methane that is emitted. There's a lot of controversy on the amount, what percentage it is. The high people say up to 7%. I've got all the papers, if you want them, I can send them to you. The low people say it's more like under 1%. And I've got to say, not through prejudice, but through all the physics that I can remember, I'm more, in terms of the arguments they muster, I'm more on the side of the low people. So I think that was all I was going to say originally, and we'll come back to conservation.
Okay. Right, Andrew.
I guess what's the reason there are no class actions in the USA? How come that's not going on? What's the issue? I think if you actually look at this, there's an awful lot of people who've been bought off. Basically, there's people being bought off by the companies who are involved in this. But there's also lobbying that's gone on an enormous scale in Congress on regulation that is associated with shale gas extraction as well, to a huge degree. And so there are people who've basically had gagging clauses put on them as part of them signing agreements.
Disgraceful. Yeah.
So that's one reason why there's not been that much class actions going on. The pressure that's come on, the legal pressure that's come on people from the oil and gas companies has been huge, and that's legal pressure on individuals, but it's also legal pressure on government, and very well funded legal pressure on government. Whenever you're looking at the energy sector, misinformation is everywhere, and different points of view, let's be positive about it, different points of view are everywhere as well. And so you've really got to try and sift through things to try and work out what is and isn't right. And all the thing about leakage, the 1% or 7%, there are different people according to the point of view which have that. The point about risk is very important. I really respect risk as being an important thing. So I was a bit disappointed that you mentioned numerical risk in terms of wind turbine. 1,500 accidents in the UK with wind turbines. What was that? Maybe a blade dropping off? I don't know. Maybe something sparked or something. You see, 1,500 wind turbine accidents. I don't think they're probably not catastrophic, are they? There's probably a very small one which has fallen over. I've seen one of those in the paper. Look, therefore all wind turbines are bad. One's fallen over. But one Chernobyl, one Fukushima. It's the severity of accidents which are important. It's when you actually look at the risks associated with it that are important. Yes, methane it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. It's still about 70 odd years though, isn't it? About 70 odd years for methane. So if you're thinking about this, 70 odd years, we ain't got 70 odd years to throw methane into the atmosphere as if it wasn't an issue. So as regards to the heavy lorries, I didn't really talk about heavy lorries and things that are associated with it. I'm more concerned with the water at the other end. And people are sort of, where is this water going to go? Who's actually handling it? Who's actually dealing with it? Who's processing it? Where's it going to go? Is it going to go back into the system, or is it going to sit in great big containers for quite a long time? What's going to happen to it once all that chromium, lead and all the other things come out of it? So that's a question I'd like answering, really. There were a number of things during James's presentation that I did just touch on. Carbon capture and storage. I was a big fan of carbon capture and storage because, you know, as a green, I want to get to the green future. I want to get us to a place where we've got much more renewable energy, we've got a lot of insulation, and we do need ways of being able to get there to be able to do that. And I quite like the idea of carbon capture and storage as a way of doing that. One of the big problems with carbon capture and storage is it reduces the efficiencies of the system when it's actually employed. And of course, there's an awful lot of work to do and actually getting working models up and running. There isn't a carbon capture and storage solution out there that's off the peg which can plug into power stations at the moment. It doesn't exist. The money's not going into it. Indeed, because of a lack of UK investment into this, a number of projects have actually been dropped, some of those in the Yorkshire and Humber region. So that's an issue. Insulation jobs. Insulation jobs are not durable jobs, and they're not skilled jobs. If you look at a lot of the materials that are actually being used for insulation these days, you've got solid wall insulation, you've got some amazing hard to treat insulation. The standards of insulation in this country could keep people going for a good number of years. You could have a 20-year programme to insulate homes and buildings right the way across the UK. We could be doing that now. That would be so valuable. That would get people into worthwhile jobs. And of course, it's not just the people who are sticking the stuff in the roofs and the walls. It's all the people who actually help that industry happen. It's the people who market the schemes. It's the people who are out there making the schemes happen. The project managers. It's the people sourcing the finance. That is great stuff. It's really important. And you know, much as people, I think Obama stood up and said, insulation isn't sexy. Of course it is. It's amazing stuff. So that's just a few comments on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. Right, okie doke, it's your turn. So, is there anything that people disagree with? Any questions people have? Any points people want to bring to the table themselves? I'll take several points. So first at 1, 2, 3. So, go on.
First of all, James, you're not comparing like with like. All the things that you've shown on there, the big land masses, you're talking about a big area like in America or in Africa or a big country where they can do fracking without too much danger because there's not so many people around and it's a big land mass. Here in UK, with a lot of people on a little tiny island, it is very, very dangerous to do fracking in this country.
Okay, thank you.
2 questions for James. One, have you seen Drill Baby be drilled? And do you think, with your conviction that contamination of the water doesn't happen, that you could debunk such a film? And 2, would you agree with Max Kaiser that the economics of fracking, never mind the environmental, actually suck?
And to ask about the geology here, so it's been said, well, you said it, that the depths of shale in the UK are somewhat deeper than in the US. Now, this could mean one of 2 things. Firstly, that the risk to water, to groundwater and aquifers is lower because you're potentially going below that level at some distance. And secondly, that it screws the economics up because of having to go deeper. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Question for Andrew. One of your starting premises in your hierarchy of demands is that we should all have, or we should all use less energy. Why? For me, I don't get that. Surely it's actually a good thing that we use more energy. It shows that we're doing a lot more things, and hopefully in the future we're going to do more things. Whereas you seem to be starting from a standpoint that wants to reduce human action, and that isn't appealing.
A sort of a question for James. I think James's presentation could be described as techno-optimism. I wonder whether you'd like to comment on a couple of possible optimistic developments in terms of biotechnology and fuel from enzymes, this sort of thing, and also ideas about creating more efficient solar cells that I believe a lot of physicists are working on. Do you think they would, if those possibilities came to fruition, they would remove the pressure for innovations in terms of things like fracking?
Well, I want to comment that James, you were very anti those who spread scare stories about the dangers of fracking. I should say, by the way, I'm pretty much on the fence myself. I haven't really made mind up one way or the other. But I have to say that you spread scare stories of your own. For example, you said that it's predicted we're going to have blackouts in 2015. That's simply not true. Ofgem's capacity margin report says that, well, their original report said we'd have a capacity margin of 4% by 2015/16. They revised it downwards to 2%. But even at a 2% capacity margin, the probability of blackouts is very, very small. It's not likely at all. So I think that's a bit of a scare story. The other thing you said that I noted was that it's not going to make energy in the UK any more secure, and it's not going to make it cheaper. And I am on the fence about it, but if that's the case, why would you bother? If the market for natural gas is going to stay in place and we're going to be able to import it from probably Russia without too much difficulty, and there's no danger from the point of view of secure supply, why bother fracking? One of the things that you do with fracking, with fracked gas, is you burn it in combined cycle gas turbine power plants, and we need to build more of those. Those assets last 25 to 30 years once they're built. If renewables keep growing at the rate that they are growing, they're going to be stranded assets. They're going to be valueless before you get your money back. So why would you invest in that?
Right, well, as most of the questions have been directed to James, we'll start with James. I've got a few points about those. For instance, the blackout one, there was a lot of scare stories about blackouts, but we can just import more, can't we? I mean, other parts of the world obviously face blackouts, but is that slightly exaggerated? Also, the contamination. The Royal Academy of Engineers say the risk of contamination is very, very low. That's the most recent thing. Some claim, I've read it multiple times, that there's been over 1,000 documented cases of water contamination next to areas of gas drilling. And then others claim that there hasn't been any cases since the cases of contamination from 1 million fracked mines in the US since 1947 is 0. So I haven't a clue whether there's been any or been none, but please come back on any and all of those questions.
Well, Craig Venter, the devil for many biologists, has worked on and is working on synthetic bacteria that could develop new energy sources and give us fuels and so on. And one thing we might usefully discuss, actually, since transport is the fastest growing source of CO2 emissions, is whether the gas from fracking would not only power power stations, but would be of use with natural gas vehicles. It would still be generating of carbon, but it would be much more efficient than the petrol-based ones, and certainly would pay back faster than diesel and things like that. So, as I made the point in my talk, all energy sources are worth investigating and experimenting with, and by the same token, new kinds of solar cells, and I showed a slide on it, and there's lots of ways to skin that cat, would be very useful. Having said all of that, quite a lot of effort, as I showed with the R&D figures, is going into solar power, as it is also into electric vehicles and electric batteries. But progress, as generally with innovation in capitalism today, is very slow. The R&D totals are down, the willingness to experiment is down, and we much prefer having 2/3 of our national assets in houses in Britain than to put them into laboratories. If you look at Apple, which has a reputation of being the most innovative company in the world, it's got $100 billion of cash sitting in banks doing nothing. They'd rather have it earning no interest than put it in laboratories. So the problem that we face is a wider crisis of innovation going beyond energy, although energy is particularly bad for that. So I'm always in favour of more of those things happening. Now, why bother to go fracking if there's no guarantee, because it's the government argument that it will end fuel poverty, not mine, no guarantee of lower prices, and indeed the economics may be more difficult than here than in the United States. I already conceded that point. The point is the one of principle and productivity, which is, if fracking was so inefficient, why is it that coal has had a major rebound in the last year or two? Because gas prices are so low in the United States that they're now having to export a whole lot of coal, and therefore Britain is burning more coal, and the whole world is burning more coal than ever before. And I know what I'm talking about, because I went to the dreaded International Energy Agency's press conference a couple of weeks ago, and Maria van der Herven, who I showed, said that coal was the elephant in the room. Because of the prevalence of shale gas and its relative cheapness in the United States, coal has made a big re-entry onto world markets. So I've got to ask Andrew, in the friendliest spirit, nobody died at Fukushima, by the way. Nobody died. Chernobyl, that was a lot more to do with Stalinism than it was to do with the nucleus. But I've got to ask you, if you're against fracking, then what do you have to say about the rebound of coal today? Now, you rightly make the point that there's not an off-the-peg solution in carbon capture and storage. There isn't. Lots of experiments are going on. More money is going into it than ever before, although in Britain's case, they spent 6 million, it is around the world. In Britain's case, Labour spent 6 million quid researching fracking when it was in power. It's the price of a small house in Cheney Walk in Chelsea. So, you know, before we say, well, look, it isn't proven yet, if more and more Greens say it isn't proven yet, it never will be proven, because we'll never do the experiments. And it's a bit like the argument, which thankfully we didn't hear from Andrew tonight, which is, you know, fracking won't develop fast enough to solve, you know, to bring about a reduction in carbon compared with coal. Well, if enough Greens demonstrate against fracking, of course it won't develop fast enough. But that's not much of an argument against fracking. So it seems to me that the important thing to remember in all of this is that, you know, I didn't predict, and I think it's foolish to try to say that there will be definitely power cuts in 2015 or 16. What I said was that the warning issued by Ofgem should be taken seriously. As it happened, there are blackouts on a local and regional basis quite widely through Britain. They're not all reported. And the same is certainly true throughout the West. And when we're talking, I'll just conclude, when we're talking about why there isn't more publicity to things, that leads me to Andrew's clever point, but not clever enough, I feel, that, you know, the class actions on fracking have been stifled by big oil, big gas. I heard a new one recently, big cable. That was a new one on me. Yeah, big cable, yeah. Although what it is still escapes me, but I think it's telly, actually. You know, if that was the case, then why is it that class actions number more than 50,000 in the case of Deepwater Horizon? Why is it that, from your argument, that the oil and gas interests, which are very properly or improperly represented on Capitol Hill, why haven't they been able to stifle those class actions? Now, finally, on insulation, I've got plenty on conservation, which I'll say in the at the end. But you know, I don't know. I noticed what you said was homes and buildings. I think you said with insulation. Do you live in a flat, Andrew? I don't mean to be personal.
No, I live in a house. Sorry,
Great.
what's the point? Go on.
Well, the point is lots of people in London, I suspect even in Leeds, live in flats. And it's not very easy to insulate a flat, right? You can't do loft insulation in a flat. You can't do cavity wall insulation with a flat very easily. You have to do whole blocks, and that's enormously labour intensive. Yeah. I'm very happy to say that it's sexy, or you know, I don't mind what Obama says, sexy or what. But you know, as far as I'm aware, and it was a green Americans for you know green energy numbers that I gave on the temporary, not durable, low skill, low tech nature of those things. I'm completely with you on the Green Investment Bank. What a joke! You know, 1,000 sign-ups. You're completely right about that.
That was the Green Deal.
Yeah, well, all right, Green Deal, Green Investment Bank. You know, none of them are going anywhere fast. Right? But if you talk to any old person, and indeed some young people, do they want EDF or E.ON fixing their loft? Do they believe that EDF and E.ON have the talent to fix a loft? Do they know anything about lofts, those companies? Maybe somebody else could do it, but whoever does it, it's going to be extremely disruptive if it's done at all. And in lots of places, it can't easily be done. So I feel that insulation is the cosseting of materials and the stroking of them without regard to the cost in terms of human labour. It's extremely tiring, sweaty, and intrusive for families that do not want to move out, do not want to get rid of all of their packing cases and old furniture in the loft, and would rather just forget about energy and get the engineers to fix it, which is my perspective.
Yep. Now, Andrew, just before, obviously there's come back on those points of James, there's one question to you, which is, why should we use less energy?
Okay.
I have a question as well, which is, in recent years, lots of Greens have reversed their decision over their opposition to nuclear, because they've realised that carrying on with opposing nuclear has meant we have carried on with dirty coal-fired power stations for longer than we had to. You know, we could, if we had carried on with nuclear, we could be 75% nuclear like France now. I know that some Greens, some of the meetings I've been to in Leeds, some Greens are expressing something similar around shale gas and saying it is preferable to coal. It is cleaner and preferable to coal. So aren't you afraid that you might, you know, we've got to have energy. Wind is supplying next to nothing at the moment. We cannot rely on renewables. We need energy. Why not gas rather than coal at least?
Okay.
Why not frack?
Okay, let's see. I'll start with the sort of human action. About what was it about? If we're reducing human action, if we're not consuming as much energy, we're reducing human action. I think that was the basic point. I think that really, in many ways, it's almost a philosophical point, isn't it? It's like whether you judge a human being or a society's worth by how much it consumes, and whether we judge ourselves by how much we consume. So that's the philosophical point. But the answer I will give you is not very far from here, in Denbydale. There's a house which is being built by a local company, a green building company, smart chaps, based in Huddersfield, near where I'm from. And they've built this new house, and the heating bills for the entire year for that building are £60. About £60 a year to heat the whole building. And if you think about a standard house, you could expect a £1,200 fuel bill these days for a property. For some properties, you could expect that. So you're looking at for that house to heat that house is about 1/20th the amount of energy for the requirement for that home. They're still getting heat. They're still getting hot water. They're still getting the basics of life, the things that you need. But in terms of consumption, they consume much less. In many ways, it feeds into the point you made. If we actually look at the problem in terms of consumption, in terms of efficiency, in terms of conservation, and we actually invest and put time into those things, it gives us more choices. It means that when we're looking at generation, when we're looking at heat, when we're looking at all those things, we have a lot more choice in terms of how we're going to deal with it. We're not faced with a lot of the difficult choices that we have at the moment in terms of nuclear, in terms of shale. A lot of those things begin to become begin to disappear, but they become less of an issue, less things that we need to worry about. We become less of a society of consumption and more of one of conservation. So when you hear Greens, you hear people like George Monbiot. I think is he one who's gone over to nuclear now?
He is. Yeah.
Is he one of those? You look at these people and you think you're looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope here on the problem. It's a predict and provide approach. We need to have this amount of energy, therefore we need to produce this amount of energy, and we see the problem the wrong way. And I think sometimes some Greens fall into that trap. Not many Greens actually in the Green Party, but that's where we are. The nuclear stuff, I think. When you look at the risks, I mean, nobody's died at Fukushima. No, well, I don't hardly know where to begin with that, because when you actually look at what's going on in Fukushima in terms of the environmental disaster that's gone on there,
Did anybody die?
People will die.
People will. That's very clever.
Okay. If you really want to push that point, we'll see where we go. But I mean, the same happens with a lot of the nuclear accidents that are around there.
Did anybody die on 3 Mile Island?
I don't know much about 3 Mile Island.
Well, nobody died.
Okay. Right. Well, there we go. I mean, so actually, look. I mean, another thing I think is worth looking at is in terms of solar panels and things like that. When you're actually looking at solar panels, you're saying that sticking one on a house doesn't make any difference. If you stick a 2 kilowatt peak, an average solar panel on a house, that will produce about 1,600 kilowatt hours a year, which is roughly about half the electricity needs for your home. And if you actually put that into if you're reducing your electricity bill by about 50%, and people can get more than that on the roof. If you did that to every property in the whole of the UK, you would reduce demand hugely in those areas. So it's not just heat, there's also renewable solutions that go some way towards, and in fact quite a significant way of reducing demand in people's homes as well. So solar power, it's not just about generation, it's about demand reduction from other sources. It's meaning that we're not needing to pull from the grid from other places. So a £60 fuel bill for your instead of a £1,200 fuel bill and half your electricity bill, that immediately begins to look a heck of a lot more attractive than it was. thing on transport, there was a mention about transport and about using the gases from fracking for transport. I think about all that renewable energy. There's a lot of renewable energy that's produced at night when it's not necessarily needed or used, that goes into the grid. I'd like to see a lot more electric vehicles actually charged up at night using renewable fuel, renewable electricity. That would be a good use of that electricity which isn't otherwise used. One of the things that they're finding in Germany, where they've really increased the amount of wind and solar enormously, is they're finding well over 50% of the electricity that's being generated at certain times is actually coming from renewables. And that's changing the whole nature of electrical supply. And they're having new problems as to how is now they've got so much renewable energy. What's the role of coal? What's the role of gas? What's the role of those carbon technologies? It's them that are on the back foot in those areas, and that's the problem they're now having to deal with. I'd like to have that problem in the UK, where we're thinking about what role do fossil fuels have in the future. We're not in that place at the moment. I'd like to see a future where we do have that problem, because that way we'll have a future.
Thank you very much. Okay. More questions?
Just to pursue the issue of reducing demand.
Okay.
You see, I do think it is a philosophical, political issue, the human footprint approach. What seems to be coming from you is a desire to reduce that human footprint, which I find really problematic and quite authoritarian in approach. To give you a good example, an example that you use yourself about the issue of green crap taxes, you can see that a lot of Greens, and it'd be interesting to hear your take on it, but you can see why a lot of Greens really go for that, because it inevitably does reduce demand as people have to pay an excess for their energy. They will, particularly poor people, will use less electricity. That I find profoundly problematic.
Okay.
And to package it as a mechanism to reduce fuel poverty is absurd, because you impose fuel poverty on people by adding that on top of a fuel bill, particularly for people who don't have the spare cash to be able to not bother about the cost of their energy. So to me it seems like a really profound authoritarian imposition to reduce demand, and as it happens, very unprogressively get poor people to proportionately pay a much higher amount.
Well, what's interesting on the demand side, I think, is that in pretty much everything, efficiency has improved massively over the last, say, 25 years. Everything we use is virtually everything we use is less energy intensive than it was. So surely there's got to be a point when, for most people, they just say, well, okay, I don't need another thing, another thing, another thing, and another thing, and another thing. But anyway, all those new things are using less energy in usage than the things that they replaced. So surely we can reasonably expect the demand for energy to decline. I mean, transport energy is something else, but definitely everything other than transport energy has been decreasing over the last 10 years.
Okay. Don't think James answered my question. Basically, had he seen Drill Baby Drill? And I point out that in that film, it's maybe water's never been contaminated. In which case, what's actually happened in Pennsylvania, which is, the eastern coast, is not short of water in the way that the western coast of America is, and yet where it's been fracked in Pennsylvania, they're having to import water because they won't drink it. Now they say it's gone to you know, they say, oh, it's drinkable, but no one will drink it, sort of thing. And the guy had to get it privately analysed, sort of thing. And yes, the whole legal thing of, yeah. So,
Okay.
and they run out of water in Texas as well, where they've been fracking. So yeah, you know, I think it's an interesting picture that James is, you know, picked. You know, but I don't think it matches with the reality.
Okay. Right at the back. No,
Yeah, I
come
just
forward.
wanted to pick up on the point about.
Just shout a little bit, please.
Sorry, I wanted to pick up on the point about everything becoming more efficient.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's true. If you look, for example, at a simple thing like the move towards digital radio, it looks as though very soon the BBC's and others are going to want us not to have analogue radio at all. And yet digital radio takes 12 times the amount of electricity to power than analogue radio.
I like the idea of your mate's £60 annual heating bill, but I wouldn't mind betting his house costs considerably more than my house. But, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these eco homes and all that, and they run on next to nothing, but they cost a fortune to build in the first place. Now, obviously, if we knocked a lot of the old houses down, which are inefficient and not really worth insulating, we could all have these houses and they become cheaper. I wonder whether you'd like that idea. Also, the closing remark on your last discussion, you were saying that way we'll all have a future, which this forms the backdrop to all the environmental thinking is we're going to destroy the planet, but surely one day by natural events it's going to go anyway, so don't we owe it to future generation? Not in our time, but in our... I'd like to think humanity would live for quite a long time, irrespective of my part in it, but I think we owe future generations that we should be tackling nature in a big way, using heaps of energy, and I don't know, let's get into space travel, colonisation, things like that. Take some some bloody nukes with us if you want, you know.
Yeah, just in response to the gentleman just then about, you know, isn't it nice if you can afford £400,000 to buy a new eco home? And certainly that's true. These new eco homes do cost a lot of money. But equally, some good local charities like Latch in particular are developing some really good retrofitting techniques for working with old terrace properties like mine. And for sure, if you include salaries, if you include like workmen, then you're suddenly looking at thousands of pounds per room. If you do it yourself, and again, Latch are definitely trying to do stuff that is doable for kind of regular people who can do kind of regular work, you can massively improve the performance of old houses, and you can, it's possible that you can have a revolution of kind of like in the Victorian back-to-backs of Leeds, not get a whole load of new expensive houses, but actually get really high-performing thermal houses.
Just a point, that seems to be a lot of emphasis on the poor old householder to do something with their home, whether or not that's possible. What kind of efforts are going into companies and businesses, not just to turn the lights off at night, for example, all the stuff we've got out here, without being a killjoy, but I don't hear about companies and businesses being persuaded to turn the lights off. I mean, London's lit up at night, probably Leeds as well. Why isn't anything happening, or is it happening?
Okay, right.
So,
I'm going to take our speakers, then we're going to go out after they've come back on some of those points. I'll come out for what will be the final round of questions. So if you've been sat on your hand all night and are dying to say something, the next time will be your last chance to say anything. So I know James is itching to get in, so go on, James.
Well, not much of an itch, but have I seen Drill Baby Drew? Yes, I have. I found it very forgettable, so I can't really remember it. Have they run out of water in Texas? I think not. Do you make a good point about companies? Absolutely. That's why I showed General Motors in Zaragoza. I'm all in favour of solar panels, providing they're at scale. I make the point again, I completely agree with you, Andrew. If everybody was in a house, then maybe solar panels would reduce the energy bills for the extent that you say. But you must accept that not everybody is in a house. Many people live in apartments or flats, and that is a problem. And the whole focus on personal consumption rather than corporations, who are the major energy users in in this country, as elsewhere, shows the authoritarian dynamic, which is of green politics, which is to tell people to change their behaviour. And the most ludicrous example of that I heard from the back. Are you seriously suggesting, the man in blue, that my 87-year-old mother DIY her loft so that she can have more insulation to, lower her energy bills? Now, what we've got to understand with this insulation thing, let's knock it on the head, that to square the circle on efficiency and energy demand, and you raise a very good point, things are more efficient. You're quite right about that, although there are things like digital radio and all the rest of it adding to energy demand. The real question is, does more efficiency necessarily lead to a lowering of energy demand? If you look at the historical record, it's not the case, right? And I think you were heading towards that. The person who really began all of this stuff about energy conservation, I'm sure he's not Andrew's hero, is Jimmy Carter, who said in relation to the 70s energy crisis in the United States, put a sweater on. And that is exactly the low-tech, DIY, foamy, insulation, and all the rest of it. I don't want to DIY energy. I look to engineers to do that because they know more than me and they can deliver more efficiently. Now let's just deal with this thing. Efficiency, does it lower demand or not? Right? Other things being equal, if you got energy cheaper, why wouldn't you use more of it? That's the question. And it all begins, I'm sure you know this, Andrew, but maybe you come back on it. Stanley Jevons, the coal question, 1883, he coined what is now known as the Jevons paradox or the rebound paradox, right? If you've got more economical use of energy, why wouldn't you use more? If I have an insulated loft, why wouldn't I turn the central heating up, right? Why wouldn't I do that? It goes a lot further than turning the lights on. You're right to say you're not a killjoy. Or what are we going to do? Not have a PowerPoint presentation? Maybe a good idea. But, it's no way to live, right? We need to accept that, especially in the developing world, the energy usage is really going to go up. And for me, that's a much more important point, people starving of energy, than the prospect of climate change. I might add that I believe Chapter 8 of the new Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on climate change says the duration of the time that we have available to us is largely a value judgment, not a question of science. That's what the IPCC said. I don't especially like the IPCC, but to say that we're headed for catastrophe, as you did, Andrew, within the next 10 or 20 years, I think betrays a risky mindset on your part. Now let's have a look at this. The IEA, who I already slagged off, right, they said, they published this, which is worth a look, right, especially for you, and you'd have fun with this. The multiple benefits of energy efficiency improvements. This is the IEA, right? The rich man's energy buyers club of energy, and they talk about, very usefully actually, different rebound effects, right? Turning up the heat, I mentioned it. Driving more, if you've got a more efficient car, why not drive some more? Buying a bigger house, right? All of these things. So they do all of that, and then they say, oh, well, look, some people have, mentioned the so-called rebound effect, right? The claim that energy efficiency improvements do not deliver energy savings because of the rebound effect resurfaces regularly. The New Yorker, The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. This shows how dishonest they are, because they're not even reading the books. They're just reading the New Yorker about it. The guy who wrote about it in the New Yorker, David Owen, did a whole book called The Conundrum. And Andrew, great that you're logging these. Can I have some of yours, please? Because I want to check yours out as well.
No,
right?
sorry, I'm not logging that. I'm just responding.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. So you've read the book. But anyway, so it's not just articles that occasionally resurface, right? It's a whole slew of books, including those by environmentalists, right, showing that if you do insulate your home, very often you will wind up doing all kinds of things that you would never have done before. You'll get a power drill, you'll have no power electric motor, you'll do all of the other things. There's a whole literature on it which the IEA completely ignored. Now the doctrine is that insulation is what McKinsey calls, the Jesuits of capitalism, low-hanging fruit. Right? It's so easy, insulation. If you run the numbers on the, well, that's what they say, right? Low-hanging fruit. It's also what Al Gore says. Now, if you run the numbers on the Obama insulation program, you will find that to insulate the homes of the bottom 2 quintiles of the American population, that's the ones that are the poorest, is going to take 130 years. And I can send you the paper, right, because I did the numbers. So, you know, we're not monkeys. We're not in the low-hanging fruit business. Right? New buildings, like your £60 home, will use less energy than old ones. But our friend in the blue at the back wants to tell us that we shouldn't be building new buildings. Could this be congruent with the government by any chance, right? We shouldn't, well, you did. You did. You said, look, we don't have to build new buildings, we just have to refurbish some old ones. Well, at a moment when with the youth of this country, like old people, face a massive housing crisis, and we've got the Malthusian bedroom tax, I want to say, build on the green belt, build anew with your insulation, as long as it's new houses, not refurbished ones. I don't have a problem with insulation. Don't have a problem with energy efficiency. More of it. What I do have a problem with is believing that it's going to lower energy demand, because that just isn't the case. Building integrated photovoltaics, like they do in China, right, where they build in the solar panels when they build the roofs, I'm all in favour of them. Nothing wrong with energy efficiency. But that doesn't mean we don't need innovation in energy supply. And any revival of the UK economy will demand more energy, not less. The only way demand for energy in this country is going to really go down is if David Cameron or Ed Miliband or Nick, what's his name, continue in government. Then with the economy going downhill, we can look forward to big decreases in energy demand. But I hope that's not the future you're looking for. So I hope that's dealt with this insulation conservation.
Okay, as well as the questions, just let Andrew answer. As well as the questions put to you, obviously most of them have been put to James. There was another one I wanted to put across, was the point you made about Germany and going down renewables. But one of the problems with the pricing is Germany's got the second highest prices in Europe now, and Merkel is actually thinking of scaling back on the renewables. And they're now, they've shut down the nuclear. They're now importing nuclear from France. They're now importing nuclear from Czech Republic, and they're now using more coal again. One of the things about Germany is you've got the Green Deal program, which was about 7 or 8% to actually get we'll come back on the insulation point, but to do a lot of the energy efficiency to reduce demand in the home. About 7 or 8% to do some of their super insulation programs. The reason I'm mentioning that is in Germany, they have a program which is about 1%. So they've got a plan, something called the Energy Vendor, where they've got a plan to reduce demand, to improve energy efficiency, to get more renewables going forward. So yes, they've got that to this particular issue now, but going forward, they have a plan to move forward. One of the things we lack in this country is a plan in terms of a strategy for energy, and that's correct. That's completely clear. We don't have that. Can I answer some of these points? Yep. I really would like to. Authoritarian Greens. I hear this every now and again from folks, and I think, just a minute, what am I doing here? I'm trying to free people from having to pay huge fuel bills to energy suppliers. I'm trying to get people more control over the energy that they use in their home because it's coming off their roof. And I'm putting more money into their pocket, which they can then spend out in the community, and I'm an authoritarian Green. You, Andrew. I just don't get it. It's a sort of, it seems to be a knee-jerk thing that comes from people that sometimes that Greens are authoritarian, and I just don't recognise it, I'm afraid. I think in many ways it's, I look at the insulation stuff. I manage insulation programs for a living as a job. And there's a material in a program that we're using on 70s built houses, 1970s random stone properties. Don't know if you've seen any of these. Fairly modern construction, but chunks of rock like this, all put together. And you can't insulate them with standard materials, with loft insulation materials, the sort of mineral fibre wool that goes, and you can't do that. There's a very good material, it's all new materials, actually it's been around for a few years now, called Technitherm, and it goes in as a liquid. It's not like the old foams, but it goes as a liquid and rapidly turns into like a polystyrene type foam material and fills all the cracks. And the reason they don't put the mineral fibre wool in is because it would create cavities within it, and it would create damp spots.
Technitherm?
Technitherm. Technitherm. If you want to check the sources of it,
No, I do.
Yeah, good. It's produced by a company called Isothane in Burnley. World leaders, even though they're from Lancashire. This material has gone into these random stone properties, and I went to see one of the first people who had it done earlier in the year, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she said, I haven't had my heating on. She was just absolutely super chuffed. I've not had my heating on. She's one of these people who notes down everything, all the energy she uses. She's a gift for anybody who's actually trying to monitor energy efficiency programs and look at them. But that's the feedback we've been getting from a lot of these programs. It's one of the first in the country that we've managed to get funding together to just about stack up to make this work. It's difficult to make it fun, but we've managed to do it. And you do a scheme like this, and you do it right the way across the country. You think of big scales for that sort of stuff. New materials, not the staff who install it, very skilled because it's new stuff. And that sort of program is going to reduce demand efficiently. They wouldn't recognise what you've said about they'll just take the comfort. They'll just turn the heating off. Not everybody by any stretch of the imagination. And particularly people will have that option now. They'll have the option when fuel bills rise to actually turn the heating down. They won't not have a choice. They will have a choice in what they do. That's not authoritarian. That's giving a choice. That's green policies giving people a choice. We did a program in Kirklees. It was, and I've got to say this, it was Green Party inspired because it was a free scheme and it was an amendment to the Kirklees Council budget in 2007, which made the scheme free. We installed insulation in 51,115 homes, and they monitored the impact of that in terms of fuel bills, because you can now get direct data. And they reckon somewhere between £4.5 and £5 million didn't go to the energy companies as a result of that programme each year, and went back into the local economy, putting less money going into the fuel companies' pockets and more money going into local shops and businesses, and going into the pockets of local people. And so you think about that, but every time you hear that there's a fuel price rise, every time you hear that 9 or 10% that goes in, the value of that saving, the value of that saved energy rises as well. And so that investment that the council made of £20 million pays for itself in local people in 4 or 5 years. And that is the most effective economic regeneration activity that Kirklees Council's ever done. Leeds, Sheffield have done similar schemes, again with a bit of inspiration from the Green Councils there, I've got to say. So these are the realities. These are things which actually happen. I do take the point about comfort. There are some studies out there about people who take a certain amount of savings in comfort, but is not the whole story altogether. There was a comment James made about, you're saying that there's going to be global destruction and awful things are going to happen in 10 or 20 years. Actually, when I think back to what I said, I didn't actually say 10 or 20 years. I didn't say that.
You did say catastrophe.
Oh, I'm quite happy to say catastrophe. And I'm quite happy to say that when you actually look at an environment which is getting warmer, you get more energy in a climate system. One of the things you get when you get more energy within a climate system is you get more fierce events. You get more moisture. You get things like typhoons, and you get some of the catastrophes that we've got going on that seem to happen to more and more now. Now, there is nobody who is going to sit there and say, there you go, I've got something written here which is categoric proof that says that was climate change that happened in the Philippines. Nobody will produce that. By the time that they're actually able to do that, it will be far too late. So I'm not saying it's 10 or 20 years, I'm saying I believe that it's happening now, and that's why we need urgency, we need to deal with it, and why I believe that some of the approaches that people take to issues like shale gas, to issues like insulation, and to a sort of laissez-faire approach to this lack urgency and are irresponsible, and that's why we need to take a much more urgent approach to recognise them.
Okay.
Flats.
Briefly.
There are flats in Leeds There are flats in Huddersfield, there are flats all over the place which are actually getting externally clad and doing some pretty good jobs on those. You can externally clad and do some good jobs. It's a skilled job. It's a job which you've got to train people up to do. And so, yes, it does happen and it does occur. So people who do live in flats are not excluded in that way. Also, there are flats in Sheffield and places like that where you can get biomass, biomass boiler which can heat those homes and do that effectively as well. So you can get zero carbon flats.
Okay.
But there's more. But
Right, this is the last round of questions. Any questions and comments have to be brief. So I'll take 1, 2.
Do buy the book and don't steal it. Or leave it if you're going to steal it.
Yep.
To carry on from flats, I live in a 2-bedroomed council flat here in the city. I capped my gas. I'm a great do-it-yourselfer. I'm also a member of the Green Party. And I only use electricity. And I spend £10 a week in electricity in the summer months, and I spend £15 a week in the winter months. And I've done that myself without anyone else. I've just insulated and done it myself with a bit of common sense, reducing energy, but not starving myself of energy. I'm not cold. Everything's fine.
Okay. And yeah.
With all the caveats I've heard tonight about what we can take from the American experience, what has actually happened to the emissions in America as a result of the shale gas? Have they gone up or down?
Emissions of CO2, emissions of methane.
CO2.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the Jevons paradox, which is, I think there are certain elements of that where it has to logically not continue in the future. There is only going to be so much you are going to want to heat a home before it actually becomes uncomfortable for too much heat, for example.
Okay. Go on.
I wasn't too clear. I wouldn't say that Texas has run dry, but certainly one village or one town in Texas, basically there's turn on the tap, no water comes, but gas does come as a result of fracking. I saw baby drill once. I didn't find it unforgettable. I found it very memorable, and yeah, it's the big elephant in the room, I think, with James.
I was just wanting to return on 2 points. One was
Just
actually
speak up a bit.
Sorry. Well, one was actually the movie you were talking about. I haven't seen it myself, but I believe that it's actually a natural occurrence of gas in the water supply. So it's been known about since I think the 1800s. So I think there's records of in Native Americans.
Biogenic is what it's called.
Biogenic gas, exactly. And the second point is when you're dealing with flats and large communities, you can actually put to use a number of green solutions which you couldn't put on a normal home. For instance, pump storage schemes. Not pump storage, sorry, heat pump schemes. Get those two confused. Where you can pump heat into the soil when it's summer and then pump it out during the winter. That's more applicable to a flat than it is to a normal home. So wouldn't that deal with the problem of not being able to insulate flats?
there's lots of ways to do it.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. I just want to, it sounds really general, but is fracking safe? Will it affect the water supply? Just as like a general, is it whether a safety issue or is it a political issue?
So is fracking safe? Was the final
Yeah.
question. Okay. Right, I'll go on. One more.
Just quickly, how does methane capture work?
Methane capture.
Methane.
How does methane capture work? Okay. If our two speakers can come back on some of those questions, and as it's your final chance, try and finish on a bit of a flourish as well. So as per usual, I'll start with James.
Well, I think it's been a great debate. I've taken lots of notes and I've learnt a lot. And I only wish that more of my opponents had the manners and the acuity that Andrew has. I fear it's not always the case, but you know, some Greens are authoritarian. I think Andrew's in the pussycat category for myself. But I've learnt a bit about flats. I do understand that there are certain solutions available, but it doesn't seem to me much of a high productivity kind of way of going about things. I do think that ground source heat pumps, which I think was just referred to, are one of the many forms of microgeneration that don't make any sense. The fact that Prince Charles is in favour of them should also give us pause. They are low tech. They were talked about in Labour's Power to the People by Malcolm Wicks in 2006. I've never met one, even on a dark night, and I just don't think they're happening for very good reasons. I'd like to believe that they could happen, and let me repeat, what we're talking about here is not fracking versus insulation. What we're saying is that insulation by itself will not solve the problems. Now, I'm sorry, well, okay, great, that's great. I'm sorry that I mentioned turning the heat up. Of course, not everybody will be having their internal temperature like an oven all the time, right? But there's another thing which you refer to, madam, which is the growth of domestic appliances, the growth of electronics, the growth of widescreen TVs, and all of these things. These are increasing energy demand. You might say, although it's not, I believe, a Green Party policy, that all flat screen TVs bigger than 40 inches should be banned. That would be authoritarian in my view. So we can only look forward to a general increase in energy demand. Now, on the authoritarian issue, I've got a whole sequence of slides exactly on that, but I'll spare you it. It's all right. Forecaster, I did see it coming. I was in Brighton. Let me tell you a story, Andrew, and then I'll shut up.
Okay.
I was in Brighton. I'm minding my own business. I say, to the cabbie, Green Council, how's it doing? And he says, terrible. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, that he had always pruned his trees in his garden, burnt the branches in his hearth, and now the Green Party, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on the council have said, you can't do that, you mustn't do that, you've got to have a wood-burning stove, buy a £1,000 wood-burning stove, and not only that, if you don't, the insurers won't cover you, and if you do, you've got to have an annual inspection for which you must pay by the fire department to show that your flue is kosher and all of these things. As it happens, the cabbie was a DIY man, although our friend in blue has stumped off. And he said he knew all about flues, and he was a builder and all of that. He was very cross that what he'd done for 30 years was now being banned by the council. And this is the programme of behaviour change, or what is much more nervous-making, behaviours. We're always trying to behave. The nudge unit in the Cabinet Office, Oliver Letwin and some of the senior figures in the Tory party, leave aside the Obama administration, are always trying to nudge you like that to change your behaviour. And the second thing he showed me was a little spy in the cab that he had. I said, what's that? He said, they keep a record of whether you go over 20 miles an hour in Brighton for 55 hours. I said, what's wrong with that? He said, you can't go over 20 miles an hour because there's so much traffic. You can't, and also the police won't enforce it because they happen to believe that there's a national law in the land that says a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I said, well, what's the problem then? And he said, well, if you're involved in an accident, if you're going 21 miles an hour, then you will be busted no matter, whether some madman jumps out in front of you or whatever. And the insurance companies will not pay out on that. And I think, having mentioned risk, the important thing is how much the Greens are tied up with the insurance industry, which really makes a profit out of risk, and how this perfectly reasonable cabbie, who's 60 years old, was having his livelihood under threat and his personal behaviour in front of his hearth under threat, because not the Andrews in the Green Party, but some other members of it, wanted to control his behaviour, because we all know that burning a log is going to lead to catastrophic climate change. Give me a break. That is authoritarian.
Okay. Andrew? Right, okay. One quick point. If you're going to go somewhere and you really want to find the truth, ask a cabbie. That's what you're going to do, isn't it? So okay, the guy who's in the cab who's burning a log. I think this wasn't so much the Green Party Council. I think it's the Clean Air Act. I don't forget the year which it actually was, but the Green Party introduced it. They introduced things called smoke control orders. And if you go to any particular council in the country, have any environmental health officers you're in the smoke control area, you are not supposed to burn things which are not in a DEFRA approved appliance. So that's just the way the law is. It's not about a green council. It's the way the law is, and it's about environmental health. So that's one particular thing. The 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. Well, a lot of people have 20-mile-per-hour speed limits for safety, but it doesn't happen in Brighton, where we have all our authoritarian green councillors. It happens in Lancashire again. Lancashire has got a policy which it's developing. I'm praising Lancashire a lot tonight. I don't know what's going wrong. But they're getting a policy for Lancashire County Council where they're doing it for residential areas across the whole of Lancashire, which they're getting together. That's 20-mile-per-hour policy around in that area. Also Portsmouth. There's a range of councils around the country. I'm trying to get them to do it in residential areas in Kirklees, but we've got a.
But why stop there? Why not 15?
We've got an authoritarian highways department which is not letting me get 20-mile-per-hour limits in the area I represent. But I wanted to free the people from all that speeding traffic, because that's the sort of guy I am. There we go. So I think we've got to finish on a bit of an up note. I mean, I very much regard green technologies. I very much regard these sort of things as the forward, as the future, as where we're going. It is the future. If we're going to have a future, that's what it's going to be. And that's where the excitement is. That's where we're actually going to see some progress. So I would say, you know, if you're looking to get renewable technologies, if you're looking to get solar panels, if you can see that wind technology is a positive thing, and that it's not necessarily a blight in the landscape, though it can be on occasions, then this is the future. If there is going to be one, it's going to be a green one. And we can't go back to going to sort of old, getting a bit of gas out of the ground, getting stuff out of the ground. That's old style stuff. You're not just getting fossil fuels out of the ground, you're a fossil yourself if you're still taking that approach. So we've got to let that go, let the fossils go.
As an old person, I find that deeply offensive.
If I was ageist, because I'm so politically correct in the Green Party, they'd throw me out. So I couldn't have meant that, could I?
Yes, the only thing banned in this room is political correctness. So.
On that note, I better stop.
Well, thank you very much to both those speakers.